Hi there, my name is Jamil of Raised Roots. I'm an urban agriculture company. I'm here with Peter, and he's going to answer a few questions that I have about VermisTerra. So my first question is, you were talking about verticillium wilt. How can the worm tea or worm castings help with trees that are especially sensitive to verticillium wilt, like olives?
Okay. Jamil, the answer to that is competitive inhibition. And so I want to emphasize again that the VermisTerra tea and the castings are not a fungicide. They're not a bactericide, they're not a nematicide. But what they do is they compete for food with pathogenic organisms aggressively. So the role of those bacteria in the worm gut is to voraciously dissolve food and consume it so that the worm can then ingest it. But in doing so, they generate food for the plant. So in the context of a field that has verticillium or some other pest, some other fungus or bacteria, the principle is the same. When we put the VermisTerra tea out, those bacteria eat the food that give those pathogenic organisms a start, a foothold, that give them momentum. So by just scouring their food, they never get off the dime, past first base, whatever analogy you want to use. They can't get started. And so they just go into back to their resting states and don't multiply. So that's the beauty of this. It's indirect. We're going after the same food and we're competing successfully for it. And it's one of the things I love about it is that you're not creating an organism that is developing, or you're not encouraging the pathogen to mutate to resistance, because you're not applying direct pressure. You're applying indirect pressure by competing for the same food.
So you're not completely eliminating the verticillium wilt. It stays dormant in the soil. Is there still some risk that the roots will eventually come into contact and wake up the verticillium?
Sure. And our philosophy is, I should say my philosophy. I don't care if I kill everything. I'm not trying to kill it. What I care about is that whatever is present that's causing me trouble stays below the threshold of affecting the plant. And so in reality what happens is that when the plant is strong, even though they get a hit from a pathogen, because they're strong, that hit has less effect. And because the soil is healthy, the hit is softer. That pathogen can't generate a head of steam and lay low that plant in a short period of time. So the plant's defenses are up because it's healthier, because the dirt's healthier.
So I know some guys that use BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, pretty widely in organic context. Now, what is the difference between using a single species like BT and using something like the worm tea, which has over 30,000 species of bacteria?
Well, the BT is a great tool. I love that. The mode of action is different. So there are two questions in that you're asking. One is how are they different? The BT is a toxin protein. The insect gets exposed to it, and they're species specific, but they ingest it and it kills them. And it's a physical. It's a physical response. The crystals of the BT protein shred the gut. The tea doesn't directly inhibit insects or other pathogens. It does so indirectly. And but your question about one point of attack versus 30,000 is important, because we know that when you put specific pressure on a population, it's an induction for them to change. That's how nature works. You put too much pressure in one spot and it's going to find a way to relieve that and get around it. In the context of using insecticides, BT is that way, but it's a much slower effect because it's a physical process, a physical effect. Using a chemical insecticide puts pressure on that population and forces it to evolve, to mutate, to relieve the pressure. When you approach a pathogenic population by starving its food because you have 30,000 different ways to do it, there's no way to evolve against that. There's no specific point of pressure. This is a natural phenomenon competing for food. So the organism doesn't mutate, it just goes into a resting state or fades into the distance because it can't compete. That's the one difference between one point of attack and 30,000.
Right. Okay, so that leads me to my next question, which is bioremediation. So I recently heard about a specific strain of some sort of mushroom that's able to break down the petroleum bond. Are there limitations to relying on this single species to do things like clean up oil spills? What are the benefits of using a tea instead?
Yeah, that's a great setup question, Jamil. Thank you. Yeah. So I love that technology. I love the whole idea of using the power that nature has and figuring out a way to harness it. So this is the sort of overall reservation that I have about us being so smart and either genetically engineering an organism to go after something specific or finding one organism and releasing it in huge numbers that we've never seen before. And it's not that it won't work or can't work or might not be the greatest thing. It's that we have to bear in mind the law of unintended consequences. When we use a single tool to address a problem and we apply that with a lot of pressure, something usually gives in the nature's systems, and we have no way to anticipate what that might be. What I like about the VermisTerra is that it's a biological system and community that already exists and has existed since worms existed. We're just taking advantage of that and applying that good biology to different contexts in numbers that we weren't able to do before. In terms of, I'm not saying that the VermisTerra tea can bioremediate in the same way that something like these mushrooms can. They're not, as a population, they're not specialized in that, but what they are specialized in is breaking things down. And so I have seen the bacteria from the VermisTerra tea break down complex hydrocarbon. So, for example, if I have an oil spill on my farm, on my property, I'll put the tea on it and it dissipates the spill, it eats it. I can't prove that it eats it. I assume it does because the oil spill goes away. We do have documentation of measuring insecticide in the dirt prior to using the tea and measuring again after we use the tea and it being gone. So we have some pretty compelling anecdotal evidence that the tea breaks down complex hydrocarbons. Think about the potential of being able to break down residual herbicide in the soil just by using the tea for something else. I love that dimension of it.
Now, can you go into a little bit the soil food web, meaning is the tea going to be competing with the soil fauna for the same food?
It's a good question. So the short answer is some. So some of the soil biome, the biology of the soil, is going to want some of the same food that the worm tea is eating. But the dynamic is more complementary than adversary. So that's the right expression, but it's more complementary than not. So the genetics of the worm biology are for those bacteria to mine and to break down food for the worm, and that includes complex hydrocarbons, it includes mineral elements, and they do so at a pace that is an order of magnitude faster than the rest of the soil biology. The byproducts of their metabolism and their cell death are the things that the existing good biology want. That's what they want to eat, as well as the plants. So when you get a flush of growth from the bacteria from the worm gut, you are feeding the good part of the soil biology and you're feeding the plant. And so it's not that when you use the VermisTerra tea, you're changing the complexion of what biology is in the soil. What you're doing is you're establishing the existing flora as the ones that are in control. You're equipping them to be doing their job and keeping the pathogenic organisms at bay.
Now, can the same logic be applied to mycorrhizal relationships? Are you taking any food away? If not, is there some sort of a different mechanism that the mycorrhizae use to get food that the bacteria is using?
Yeah, and the short answer to that is I don't know. But we can infer some things we know about mycorrhizae and what we know about good soil and biology and how those sort of interact. So mycorrhizae specifically have a symbiotic relationship with the roots. So they live on the things that the roots exude in the form of organic acids and carbon, and in turn they package nutrients to give back to the roots to make it easier for them to eat, which is also what the bacteria in the worm tea do. So in that sense, yes, they are competing for the same food, but like with the general soil biome, the relationship is more complementary and symbiotic because the bacteria in the worm tea aggressively eat that food and aggressively generate metabolites that can be used by other organisms. And if you think about it, mycorrhizae thrive in healthy, vibrant, active soils. Mycorrhizae struggle, like the rest of the biome, in challenged soils that aren't as biologically active. So the logical progression is, if we make the soil more biologically active and healthy, are we going to help the mycorrhizae? And the clear answer is yes, we are.
So let's say I need to add organic matter to my soil. The traditional solution, in my mind at least, is to add a whole bunch of compost. Is that the right solution? And if not, why?
Okay, so compost, Mindy and I talked about this in another video. Compost, first of all, is not all created equal. Secondly, it's not that it's inherently bad, it's just that we don't always think about it the right way. So compost will not increase the level of your organic matter. What you're usually trying to do with compost is increase the tilth of the soil and add a little more biological activity. What happens though is we put unfinished compost in the dirt, which is mostly carbon, which then requires the dirt to break it down, which requires nitrogen. That nitrogen is going to come from somewhere, and it usually is at the expense of the plant that you're trying to feed. So you initially go through this negative nitrogen sink before it turns around and supplies nitrogen back to the plant. And in the meantime, you also have what I call unfinished food that lures all kinds of pests, termites, bugs that you don't want, and sort of little pockets of uneven activity. Your soil's not smooth, it's spotty. Some spots are great, some spots are hot, some spots are anaerobic, some spots aren't. So it's not that that compost is inherently bad, it's just we don't always know how to think about it. Adding worm castings or tea to your compost will always break it down faster. But you want to be careful about, and that's a good thing. But if you're adding compost and you put worm castings with it, it's going to be a fast breakdown, which may suck nitrogen pretty fast from the soil. The best thing I've seen, Jamil, is just use the castings in place of compost. In reality, it is the world's finest, most complete compost, and it will actually increase organic matter. And it does build the biology of the soil without any downside. There's not a negative effect that you have to overcome, and you don't have to be smart to figure out how to use it. You just have to be smart enough to use it.
I've seen farms that typically add about 6 inches of compost onto their beds, and you see great growth usually for the first season, and then if you don't keep replenishing that 6 inches of compost, eventually some sort of pest or disease comes in. How is that explained?
Well, it's because breaking down all that carbon takes time, and the response you get is the nitrogen response that comes down when you reach a certain stage of decomposition. You release the nitrogen that it took to break it down, and the plants eat it up. So you get, it's unquestionably, you get a plant response. But you're building all of this unfinished food in the soil, which lures pests and creates an environment that is uneven. So I mean, we've done that for a long time, but we're never satisfied with the results, or we don't like the downside that comes with it. What I'm saying about this is that vermicompost is the Ferrari of compost. It acts smoothly, it is powerful, and there's no downside. You can't put too much on. It's not hot, and it makes the soil easy. It makes it even. So that's what I love about it.
Now, can you explain the mechanism behind the effect that using tea and castings in the soil specifically have on insects that may not even live in the soil, things like spider mites, whiteflies?
Right. So again, the effect is indirect. So the tea and the castings aren't an insecticide, and we don't sell it like that, but it has an effect on the plant's health. So sucking insects look at plants through the lens of how much nitrogen they have stored in their leaves, and they're drawn to plants that have a high nitrogen content. They can see it in their far red vision. What the tea and the castings do is indirectly affect the strength of the tissue, how nitrogen is metabolized and stored, because a plant will store nitrogen it doesn't need. It can't make it into something, so it sticks it somewhere. What you want is the plant to regulate its own nitrogen uptake so that it only takes up what it needs and doesn't store excess. So you'll see balanced, healthy plants have a lot less stored nitrogen. And they have thicker cell walls because they're able to use more calcium. That's all part of what using the worm products does in the soil to the plants, which then are less of an attractant to sucking insects. So we've seen fields where we're using product right next to fields where we aren't. The fields where we're not have white flies flying everywhere. The fields where we're using it, we don't see any. Well, it's not because the white flies are dying, it's because they don't want to do the work to suck on these plants when these plants are so much easier.
Okay. So let's say I've got an orchard and I'm interested in large fruits. So I apply tons of nitrogen, different things to make them large. I'm not as interested in flavor. So is this an appropriate situation where I should be using worm tea or worm casting?
Great question. Answer is no. If what you're after is big flavorless fruit, maximize size, this is not the way to get there. If what you want is more fruit and sweeter fruits with more flavor, then yes, you want this. Because what the tea will do and the castings and good soil will do is equip the plant to express its genetics fully. You're not pushing the plant in the direction of, say, make bigger fruits when genetically your fruit is smaller. What you're doing is equipping the plant to run at its highest efficiency and do its best. And that always translates for fruit trees, that always translates to more fruits, sweeter fruits, and the size of fruit that the tree decides it should be. So what do I want to say about it? There's a lot of ways to get bigger fruit. One of them is to just not have as many fruit on the tree. So you can use the tea and thin the fruit if you want bigger fruit, but fruit that is at a maximum of flavor and strength of the skin and all those things. Yeah, so, but the idea of, and I'm glad you brought that up, that the holistic way that the tea and the castings work to equip, it's like what we used to say about spelling. The E after a consonant makes the vowel say its name. And it's like the tea and the castings allow the plant to say who it is, to do what it's supposed to do.
So along those lines, let's say I'm growing a crop that requires different types of feeding at different times. So during vegetation, I'm using tons of nitrogen. During flowering, I might be using tons of phosphorus. So if I'm interested in using only worm tea, do I need to apply different levels at different times, or how does that work?
Right. In my opinion, the short answer is that you apply consistent, moderate amounts, but regularly, and let the plant and soil figure it out. Because usually when we're modifying our input to get a specific response is because something is rate limiting to be able to get that particular response at a particular time or in a particular way. So when you, and maybe this is a two-part answer, the first thing I want to do is take away all the things that are rate limiting so that the plant is operating at its maximum capacity. Then if I need to manipulate it, the manipulation is easy. It's not a big hill to climb, it's just a nudge without a cost somewhere else. So we were talking earlier about the network of plant physiology pathways, and when you push a plant in one direction, it's going to move something else. If you demand that a plant do something, it's going to cost you in some other area because the plant only has so much to work with, so it's going to rob Peter to pay Paul. So when you are operating in balance and in the state of health and luxury, those nudges are easier and they don't cost as much. The plant can do more things at once because it has more to work with.
Worm castings, can they be used in animal feed, and what effect might they have?
I frankly don't know. I will be speculating about this. I would guess that based on our experience with bees and using the worm castings or the worm tea as a probiotic, that because of where they come from, which is the dirt, that those bacteria in worm feed are going to accelerate the decomposition in the gut of the animal. So it's going to make it more digestible. And what I anticipate is that crops grown with the worm products are going to be more digestible and have more relative food value. But I'm speculating.
Can you talk about your own background and what some dilemmas you had when you first figured out that biology is the answer and that we may not know everything about why it's the answer?
Right. Well, I come from my degree's in bacteriology, and so that degree encompasses a broad range of disciplines. And my first job was working for a biotech company in the 80s, and we did lots of neat stuff. It was at the dawn of the genetic engineering age in plants. And so we did agrobacterium mediated transformation and everything that goes with that, the tissue culture and all that stuff. And I got interested in soil science after that period of my life. And I was trained by some very sharp people to analyze soil chemistry, to figure out how to analyze a soil report, break down mathematically what was available and how much needed to be supplied to bring the soil into balance. And it was all very calculated. The purpose of it, though, was to provide a framework for which to sell ag chemicals. And it's not that that isn't legitimate. It's just that I realized it's only part of the story. And as the expression I use with you is, it's measuring with a micrometer and cutting with an axe. You can measure all these mineral components based on your soil test, but you have no idea what biology is going on or what that's going to do when you put stuff in soil. So it's like a big black box that we just sort of empirically figure some things out from. So I had invested a lot in figuring out how to analyze soil mathematically. And when I first came across the worm products and their effects, the challenge to my thinking was, I can't define this mathematically. I can't run a series of equations and come up with an answer or predict what this is going to do. And that was a big leap for me to say, I don't have to figure all of that out, because what I see is better than what I can figure out. I've invested all this thinking in how to look at that, and now I realize all I have to do is let the biology do the work, and it's better than what I can come up with. So I'm not saying that has no value. It helps me understand where the starting point is in the soil that I'm working with, or so what some of the rate limiting things are, or why things are happening. But the solution is pretty simple. The tea and the castings always fix those things, and I don't have to figure it all out. Again, I just have to be smart enough to use them. And so that's the dilemma I have. And growers have this dilemma too. They've got a lot invested in the way they do things, and that has value. And we don't want to say that doesn't have value. What we want to say is, this is the piece you've been missing. This is the piece that gets you to where you were trying to get with everything else you were doing. And maybe we can look at what we've done in the past through a different lens, because now the biology is good. And when the biology is good, everything gets easier.
So I have have another specific question. The strawberries, they require fumigation after about 3-4 years. Can this reduce or eliminate my need for fumigation?
Again, the short answer is yes, it can. It's this is, I like to say this is a numbers game. And the numbers are the number of bacteria that you're gonna, from the worm gut, that you're gonna put in the soil against the number of nematodes or other pathogenic organisms that want to eat on those strawberry plants. But they don't eat the plants first. What they do is they're lured to the plants by the food that those plants give off. So if you use the tea in the castings to release those bacteria to eat the food before the nematodes can and before the other pathogens can, then they've got nothing to live on, and they're not a problem. So again, competitive inhibition, and we've done this with almonds. Even when there's nematode present, we put the tea out there, there isn't any food to live on. So the good biology wins, and we've been able to eliminate the need for chemical fumigation.
So it sounds like it's pretty important for the tea, for the beneficial bacteria to take a hold before the pathogens do. How do you ensure that happens?
Well, it's best if that happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to happen that way because we have gone into fields where the pathogen count was deadly and recovered those orchards. And the principle is the bacteria can still out-eat the pathogen. Pathogens are typically facultative growers. They grow more slowly. It's just that they're determined and they're tough to, once they get going, they also accelerate the bad environment, because as the plant starts to lose the fight, it's giving off more of what feeds more of the bad guys. And so it's like they turn the environment and make it suitable for themselves. What the worm tea does, goes in, it changes the paradigm, levels the playing field, because it can eat that food faster because there's more of them and they work harder. So they'll consume that food, reset the playing field, and suddenly the pathogen is not in a superior position but an inferior one. And so if you're trying to prevent something from happening by establishing a clean soil, or if you've got a problem and you're trying to clean it up, this is the best way to do it.
Wow, well those are very wise words, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
It's been my privilege.
Yes,
Thank you.
I appreciate it.